All right, you came back for part three. Excellent. All right, so what we want to do in part three is talk about some of the other features you might want to think about and manipulate as you create an assignment. So when we left off in part two, I just showed you that the assignment that we have been working on so far has now appeared on our, has an assignment bar of its own, I should say, within our course. Right now you'll see that everything's green, all three phases. That's kind of weird, but that's again just because I didn't really set the dates appropriately. Okay, normally you would actually have either everything gray or, as you see above, whatever phase is active would be green and the other phase is not. So when you set the dates appropriately, that's what you'll typically see, is that only an active phase will be in green. But again, it'll appear on the bar as you see it. It's got that faded look right now. That's because students can't see it. I'm going to keep it that way because students in my intro psych class are logging in for this assignment, and if this pops up, they could become confused. And so I don't want it to pop up, but the one moral of the story is it doesn't matter. You can do all this work with a hidden assignment that students can't see. And in fact, what can you do? I just want to point out some features while we're right here. You can, at a glance, get a sense of the details that you've assigned for this. And a lot of these details are the ones we're going to be playing with. So I'm going to come back to this actually after we've played with them. You can see what your assignment will be like from a student's perspective. I'm also going to come back to that, but you can do that all through. You can preview and see what it looks like to the students. You can duplicate your assignment if you want to, have two assignments that are just subtly different. You can just create one and then duplicate it and make any changes you want. You can edit the assignment once it's created. That's what we're going to do in just a moment. And you can also unhide it. And so right now it's hidden. I could make it visible if I wanted. I don't want to. And you can delete an assignment once it's all done, or once you don't want to have it kicking around in your course tab anymore. What we're going to do right now is edit. And when we edit, we go right back to where we were before, that place where we can set the dates, the assignment media, the instruction-specific tips. We did all that. So now I want to go to the Settings tab. So this is where you can have a lot of control over your assignment if you wish. So let me just give you a sense. I'm going to go a little quickly, but there are, when you get here, you will see comments underneath each. And we also have a nice help file that's being created and built up all the time that will give you a lot more information on each of these things. So feel free to check that out. But the quick story is this. Here's some options you have. First of all, do you want your students to resubmit an assignment? Do you want to make it a proper formative assessment sort of assignment? You don't have to. But just about, this is pedagogically, this is where a lot of the good learning happens. So mostly we're just going to want to keep that on. But if we did just want peers just to benefit from each other's feedback and not take it any further, we could just have it stop once they see the feedback from their peers. Again, not a common thing to do. We're going to want that on. Assess the feedback. When students see feedback presented by their peers, the default is to ask them to literally, with a little pull down, say how useful that feedback is. And this is a good step, I think, for really pushing them to explicitly evaluate the feedback. So again, this is one you're probably going to want to keep on, but if you wanted to, you could turn that feature off. Now, reflection. This is with respect to the revise, resubmit phase, and that third phase of the assignment. And this is optional, first of all, so you're probably going to want students to resubmit, but you can just have them resubmit, or you can do a couple of extra things, and this is one of those extra things. So the reflection will prompt students to reply to some query that you give them, intended usually to get them to reflect on the process they've just went through. This is kind of at the end of the assignment. So within this box, if you turn this on, you can ask whatever you want. So if you want to make this step about planning for the future, you could focus them. You could say, okay, you just went through this. What have you learned, and what will you take with you from this assignment that you will apply in future assignments, for example? Or you could get them just to reflect on, why did you use certain feedback and why didn't you? Whatever you want, you can input the question here, and they will be prompted with a little dialog box to reflect on that. Okay, so again, just to give them more exercise. Student submission type, this is where you define what sort of assignment you want it to be. That is what you want students to do. The most common will be probably to ask them to write something, and that's called composition or in browser text. But you could also ask them to do any of these other things. You could ask them to upload some file. Maybe you want them to share computer code. Maybe they had to create a computer program to do something, and now you want them to evaluate each other's code. You could do that. You can have them upload images, audio files, videos, whatever you want them to do. This is where you specify what it is that students will be sharing. And again, the most common thing is they'll be sharing compositions, but all of these things are possible. Now, here's a kind of important one, the number of peers. So this literally is saying how many peers do you want a given student to have to assess, and in return, there's two things linked. How many peers will assess that student's work? This number really reflects both of those things. So whatever you set it as, in the example, for example, that we've been talking about, you've seen it at 3. So whatever you set it as, that's literally how many they'll be asked to review and how many will review them. So when you're thinking about this, at some level, the more the better. But you also have to keep in mind the workload that the student on the student side. That if they're being asked to read very long compositions, for example, it's probably not reasonable to ask them to evaluate 6. But if they're doing much shorter things, if everybody just has to write a paragraph on something, then maybe 6 would be okay, maybe 10 would be okay. You can set that wherever you want it to be. Okay, and let's set it at 5 because I want to show you a preview feature, and I just want to highlight that that's working. All right, so that's the number of assessors. Now here are some options when they're doing the assessment, some things they can do. So first of all, do you want overall comments or not? If you turn that on, you can provide labels to those comments if you like. So you can be specific about what you want them to be. Generally, they default towards a request to provide something positive about what the other person has done, and one that is meant to provide some constructive comment, something to try to help the student improve their work, of course in their resubmission. So that's the default. That'll probably work well for most people. But if you want something more specific, you can include that. This feature is to allow inline comments. That is to allow students to select little bits of text and link comments specifically to that. So if you want them, for example, to highlight grammatical mistakes or sentences that aren't sentences, things like that, you might want to turn the inline comments on. You can also choose whether you want students to rate each other. Usually we recommend that you do ask them to give each other some rating as a first step towards kind of expressing how good they think something is. That it's sort of a quick and dirty way of saying, I think it deserves whatever. But you don't have to. You can turn that off. You can have it just comments. They're just giving each other comments, no ratings at all. If you turn it on, then you can decide whether you want like a 4-star scale, whether you want them to rate on a 1 to 100 scale, or whether you want to customize some scale that will have a minimum value. Well, you can decide how many levels you want it to have. So if you want a 1 to 10, and you can anchor them by putting a label on the minimum value and the maximum value. So here's what a 1 means, here's what a 10 means. Okay. You can also ask students to assess their own work as they go through, and you can do that in any, or all of the 3 phases. That's completely up to you. So that'll just prompt students to evaluate their own work. And then finally, these 2 on the bottom, this one you're going to want on all the time, peer anonymity. This means when peers, I think you're going to want it on anyway, when peers are assessing each other's work, they don't see whose work they're assessing. And this final one's kind of interesting. In this final one, when the teacher is assessing students' work, they don't know which student they're assessing. Not, of course, until after they output the file. So that's kind of nice for eliminating any biases. Those are your features, and I'm going to come back and tell you more about grading options and advanced options.